volunteered to teach the entire Bible because it is technically a one-chapter book. So look forward to that at the end of our study there, and we'll be ending up somewhere around 2026. So be looking forward to that. Now, in all seriousness, this is a food for thought kind of thing. If you remember from our last week's study, we are going through the one-chapter books of the Bible as they are divided up now. And we are currently in our second lesson of Obadiah. Listening to my dad preach, as for my entire formative years growing up, my dad would always joke about the one-chapter books or the more obscure books as being books that, boy, doesn't your Bible just fall right open to Obadiah? One of the books that maybe we don't visit quite as often as maybe we should, or ones that are just physically difficult to locate because they are so small. But it's good to make sure that, every single part of the Bible gets the proper attention that it needs. So when Baxter told me we were doing these one-chapter books, that's a different, unique thing that I don't think I had ever heard about, that I hadn't studied before. So I was also grateful that he asked me to start out with Obadiah. And so as we continue our study of Obadiah, Obadiah is preaching to the Edomites. The Edomites are the children of Esau, if you remember of, Jacob and Esau. And so he eventually settles in an area. After some back and forth, he kind of chases after Jacob for a while. And then they go a few years without interacting. And then later on, they come together again, have a fairly amicable meetup again. But then after that, they go their separate ways. And Jacob, of course, goes on, becomes the tribe of Judah, the Israelites as we know them, and Esau settles his own land, and that line becomes the Edomites. And so now, after many years of historical back and forths, as we talked about, oftentimes the Edomites and the Israelites would butt heads. They would not usually end up on the same side of a conflict. One of the very few examples of them being on the same side is an example that my study book brought up, was a war fought after King Ahab died. The Moabites rebelled. The Moabites basically said, we're not going to be a part of this whole, Israel kingdom anymore. We're going to go off, do our own thing. And so with that happening, the forces of Judah under the new King Jehoshaphat, and then the Edomites, and one more kingdom. It was Israel, Judah, and Edom, all teamed up to fight against the Moabites. And so this is one of the very few examples of Edom and Israel/Judah having kind of a similar goal. The Bible doesn't really talk in detail about the battle, victors, what really happened, but it's interesting that there is an account of that battle, which is carved into what is known as the Mesha Stone, which is an important historical artifact. Pieces of it eventually was broken up over time just from weathering in history, but it is in the Louvre. Pieces of it are kept. And from the Moabite perspective, Moab won a valiant victory. They won. There were really not any losses that happened, but as further historical research has found, that may not have quite been the case. That may have been the king of Moab wanting the people to kind of think, oh yes, we did so well in this battle, when in fact it wasn't quite so one-sided. But anyway, all this to say, that is one of the few historical accounts that we have of the Edomites helping the Israelites. And so, in our first bit of our study here in Obadiah, oftentimes when the prophets are going and speaking to a people, we can almost view it as a court case. Oftentimes what has happened is whoever the prophet is speaking to, for example, our previous study of Isaiah. Isaiah has gone to Jerusalem, to the people of Judah, and has said, you all have turned away from God's will. Here's exactly what you have done. Isaiah starts out reading basically the accusations, the charges brought against Jerusalem. And here in the same way, Obadiah does the same thing to the Edomites. He comes to them and he tells them, you have turned away from the ways of the Lord. You have fought against Judah, against the Israelites, and now there will be punishment. And we studied through all of that. And now, here in lesson 2, we're going to talk about the historical evidence of Edom disobeying God and coming against the Israelites. So if we want to open up to Obadiah, obviously chapter 1, but we're going to be in verses 10 through 14 this morning. So we've already read the accusations, the charges brought against the Edomites, and now the Lord, through Obadiah, is going to present the evidence. So, if someone wants to read, let's read verses 10 and 11. Let's start with just 10 and 11.
For violence against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried captive his forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, even you were as one of them.
Thank you. So, here we see that Edom, according to Obadiah, has a history of basically standing to the side as Jerusalem was attacked. One of the more pertinent examples that we've already read about in Isaiah, we study about how Babylon came and they besieged Jerusalem. And it happened once, and eventually they had to turn away and we did not conquer Jerusalem. But then the second time, Babylon comes back. And that time, Babylon breaks through and conquers Jerusalem and takes everyone away and razes the city. And here we're seeing that, Edom, not just a neighbor tribe that didn't have any kind of connection with Jerusalem. This is literally long lost cousins. This is the same, general family line, watching basically your uncle's kids being attacked by a totally foreign country and just being off to the side boy, that's a bummer. Anyway, so here it says, in the day that foreigners entered the gates of Jerusalem, in the day where strangers carried captive Jerusalem's forces, you stood on the other side. Even you were as one of them. There are many historical accounts that say the Edomites might have given Babylon information. They might have stopped Babylon as they were marching by and going, hey, we could give you a few tips and pointers on, how the culture of Jerusalem works, how best way you could get into their heads, get into the city. If we remember, whenever the captain of the army that came against Jerusalem called out to the city, he started quoting scripture to the advisors of the king, to the point where the advisors of the king said, could you not speak Hebrew so that the people can't hear this? And the captain of the Babylonian forces said, no, I'm going to speak Hebrew because I want everyone to hear what I'm saying. Almost like they could have had an informant. Someone who would have told them, if you really start playing up the whole God's will thing, that might really mess with them. There's a very real possibility that the Edomites could have been feeding Babylon information to really mess with Jerusalem as the siege was going on. And so we see that Edom might not have just looked the other way. In fact, the claim here is that Edom was directly involved, whether physically attacking the city or not, to have a hand in Jerusalem being conquered. So, continuing there in verse 12, but you should not have gazed on the day of your brother in the day of his captivity, nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Parents who have more than one kid, have you ever punished one kid and the other kid thought it'd be funny to really make fun of them while they're being punished? Yeah? That's the thing that happens, because I know I did that with my sister. My sister did that to me. There's that sick pleasure of like, haha, you're the one being punished, and I'm not receiving any of it. And obviously way more, I guess, like hard consequences. But this is essentially what the Lord is saying. Edom also did this, is as Jerusalem's being conquered, as they're having their livelihoods taken away, Edom is over in the corner throwing a little party. Woohoo, I'm not the one being punished. Brother cousins over there are getting everything taken away. Ha ha ha. In the book of Amos, it says that Esau never truly let go of his despise for his brother, even though their last meeting face to face was fairly friendly. According to the prophets, Esau never truly gave up his grudge against Jacob. And we can see that that is leaching in to the Edomites. That is carrying on through his people, because historically Jerusalem has never taken up arms against Edom for no reason. Jerusalem has never given Edom any reason to feel like they have to get in on the destruction. And yet here we see that years, decades of grudges, of hard feelings against the Israelites has caused Edom to turn against the Lord's people. That not only are they not helping in a difficult time, not defending their brothers whenever they're being attacked, but they're taking joy in the fact that their brothers are being destroyed. Nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. In Psalm, we can find examples of first-hand accounts of people in the midst of Jerusalem being conquered. But it's interesting, you don't have to turn with me, but if we want to look at Psalm, and I believe it's Psalm 137, is an account of this. Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for our captors asked us for our songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing songs of the Lord while in foreign land? And if we go down a little further to verse 7, we see the perpetrators of this sick pleasure of the people asking them to sing songs while they're in captivity. Verse 7, remember, Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to the foundations. The Edomites weren't just celebrating the fact that Jerusalem was being destroyed. They were egging it on. They were over in the corner saying, tear it down all the way. And so here we're getting some pretty hard evidence. Eyewitness accounts, historical writings. This isn't just consequential evidence that could be flitted away as coincidence. The Lord is bringing forth eyewitness accounts against the Edomites. Continuing in verse 13, you should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Indeed, you should not have gazed on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. It just continues to get worse. They're not just looking the other direction. They're giving the information to the people attacking Jerusalem. They're not just being informants. They're celebrating the destruction of their brother's city. They're not just standing off to the side and celebrating the destruction of Jerusalem. They're coming in and taking spoils of whatever the Babylonians are leaving. They don't even have, as horrible as it sounds, they don't even have the gall to be among the first forces that march through Jerusalem. They don't even have the honesty to just march in with the Babylonians. They wait for Babylon to come through, raise the city, They encourage them. They say, tear it down, tear it down. And then once Babylon has everything they've wanted, everything that they've finished out doing, then Edom comes in. Like vultures. Yeah. Scavengers are not highly thought of in biblical times. Oftentimes, if a animal that comes through and picks up the things afterwards are kind of thought of as a curse. In Isaiah, we talked about after Jerusalem is razed to the ground, the jackals will come and make their home in the ruins. Might have been described in the Edomites were probably part of the jackals and the owls and all the bats, the things that live among broken things. The Edomites are one of those. They come in marching, stepping over dead bodies of people that they might have known, people they might have been related to, and are saying, you know, I always wanted that candelabra over there. Thank you. The Bible also doesn't think highly of betrayal. In the different accounts, as I looked up examples of Edom and Israel, in the Psalms they write about, if I return evil for good that has been given to me, let my enemies hunt me down. The psalmist often wrote about, if I don't have the common decency to just straight up attack someone for good enough reasons, if I turn around and betray someone, if I stab someone in the back, I deserve a fate worse than death. But this is exactly what the Edomites have done to Jerusalem. No prompting, no previous attacks that the Edomites might have had some kind of justified reason to dislike Jerusalem. They simply saw an opportunity to get a little bit of spoils out of an already bad situation, and they jumped on it. Verse 13 again, you should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Indeed, you should not have gazed on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. They're sweeping through and taking whatever they want, like a thief in the night. Does that sound familiar? When times couldn't get worse, it got worse. Because here come the Edomites picking through rubble, picking through burning homes, buildings, and saying, you know what? That's something that I want. And yet, it's still not the worst thing we're going to hear about them doing, because we're going to get down to verse 14. You should not have stood at the crossroads to cut off those among them who escaped, nor should you have delivered up those among them who remained in the day of distress. They weren't just satisfied with taking from a people already destitute, already conquered, already injured. Apparently, according to historical accounts, they were waiting outside every major road of the city, and any Israelite trying to leave Jerusalem, they either killed or captured them and sold them off to the Babylonians. They looked people dead in the face, people from the same parentage, and said, nope, you're coming with me. Our original example that we looked at was back when Moses was leading the Israelites out of Egypt. They wanted to march through Edom's property. And they said, we won't take anything. We'll pay for anything we might take. And Edom said, no, you're not going to do that. If you do, we're going to attack you. And even when Jerusalem said, okay, we won't march through, Edom still marched out his forces as a show of superiority, just in case anybody wanted to really try and sneak their way through. And here we see Edom has been directly involved with the destruction of Jerusalem. They've been directly involved coming through, stealing what has already been tossed to the side by Babylon. But then even if some few people who managed to escape with their families, just themselves, they're being actively snatched up by the Edomites and sold into captivity. not a single one of these things have the Edomites showed even a shred of honor. Like we said, when two forces come to war, there's at least an understanding of, we are in conflict, but I know who I'm fighting. I know why you're fighting me. I know why I'm fighting you. There's some form of honor in looking your opponent face to face and knowing why you're fighting. Here, a tribe who you have shown nothing but maybe not complete and total, like you haven't been generous, you haven't given them gifts, but you have had no quarrel with a tribe that is from the same family line as you, that has lived off to the side, that you have just been like, okay, we're like, you have your place, we have our place, and has never really tried to overstep those boundaries, has never tried to gain or grab any more land than is needed. And yet, at the first opportunity, Edom has turned right around and stabbed Jerusalem in the back. There's turning away from God's will, and then there's actively seeking to destroy the Lord's people. Not even directly like Babylon, but just to be a part of the little vultures that crawl back through. Babylon burned and looted, slaughtered the people of Jerusalem, and Edom looked on in celebration as they dug in the pockets of the corpses that are burning. It's at this point in the court case where the what's the name of the accuser's lawyer? Anyway, prosecutor. At this point, the prosecutor just throws their hands up and says, "That's all I've got," and turns around and walks off. And at that point, you could probably hear a pin drop from everyone in the courtroom, because this is the most, for lack of a better phrase, the most damning evidence you could bring into court. There is you could go to the Edomites' house and find all the belongings of the Israelite people who have been murdered, who have been slaughtered, and are now enslaved. And there would probably still be blood on the hands of the Edomites as they sit there being accused by the Lord. Yeah. They would have absolutely been justifying it to themselves in their own minds, going, this is for Jacob. How long ago was that again? Just a few hundred years, but we're still owed that, yeah.
When Ezekiel gives his prophecy against Edom, he says they had an everlasting enmity. So he recognized that they had that. And feelings, even though they had kind of agreed to disagree, but
Yep.
it was still there.
Yeah. It's very much the case of Israel had moved on, which, of course, is far easier to move on when you're the one who gained from a bad situation, rather than being the person who was slighted by it. But as part of the descendants of Jacob, you would think, being a part of, at least parallel to the Lord's chosen people, they would have had so many opportunities to bury that hatchet. But instead, they sat there and they sharpened it. Every single year, they'd drag out that same grudge and would remind themselves, one day I'm going to get mine. But that's not how the Lord tells us to act, is it? The Lord had standards even for the Gentiles. Even if you weren't part of the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, he still wanted you to live in the way that he commanded his own people. And as we saw with Isaiah, as he's preaching to the Israelites coming out of captivity, he's talking about how the Lord's people is going to be more broad, how it's going to include
not just the Israelites. The Lord has always had a plan for everyone to be a part of his people, but you still had to follow his commands. That's something that's made abundantly clear. We're not going to be as stringent on who can enter the temple, who can be on the mountain of the Lord, who's going to be in the New Zion. But ye have to follow the commands that I've set. And goodness knows, betrayal and holding a grudge are not, unfortunately, covered under the Lord's new program. And so I think this is a good example for people today of, this might be one of the most extreme examples of holding on to grudges, of not being able to let go of someone who slighted you in the past. But, like we've said, Ezekiel spoke to Edom. Obadiah now is speaking to Edom. There have been multiple prophets that have written warnings, that have written letters to Edom to say, stop. Just let this go. You are our long-lost brethren. If you turn away from these evil thoughts, if you turn away from these evil actions, there is still chances for you to come back into the fold. But, as we've seen, Edom hears these words directly from the mouths of prophets and still can't let go. Can't let go of that one thing. They've been holding on to it so tightly. Whenever you're working with a tool, let's say a screwdriver, and you've just been twisting and turning and turning and turning, when you go to let go of that screwdriver, does your hand automatically open right up? If you've had a tight grip on something for a long, long time, it is physically difficult to let go of it. Even more so, emotional, if you've been holding on to trauma, you've been holding on to bad thoughts for so long, it almost becomes a part of who you are. It almost starts to play into how you interact with people, how you approach future conflicts, how you talk to others who might fall into the same category as that one person who slighted you so long ago. And yet, as we've seen, not just in our Bible stories, but probably in your personal experiences too, when you finally are able to let go of that thing that you've had your grip locked on for so long, it's freeing. In the same way, you might have cut off the circulation to your hand. When you let go, it might physically feel like you can feel the blood rushing back into your fingers, moving back, and suddenly you can feel the full extent of your hand again. In that same way, if your heart has been so locked up by greed, by anger, by whatever emotions might be holding it captive, once you truly let that go, all of a sudden, it's such a freeing feeling. Yeah.
Doctors say one time that to hold on to something like that is like acid. It eventually consumes the container that's holding it.
Yeah. You block off any good things that might be trying to come to you. If you're so locked up inwardly that you can't realize that there's people trying to help you, that there's good things coming towards you, all you can focus on is this bad thing that happened to you so long ago. And yet, yeah, once you purge yourself of that emotional acid, that's such a good visual help. Once you let that go, once you flush that out of your system, suddenly there's so much more room for the good to come flooding back in, for good emotions, for love, for forgiveness, for grace. That now you've opened up all the room that you have, and it can be filled with what is good.
And so, bit of a, these are all a little bit shorter since we have such a small content pool. But as we kind of move on from the evidence that's been presented of Edom, let us always remember that not only do we need to remember to not hold on to the bad things sometimes, we also need to recognize that sometimes, whether it's just human nature or whether it's because of past traumas, we can't take joy in other people's suffering. Schadenfreude is a German term for taking pleasure in others' pain. And as inconsequential as that might be sometimes, it might be watching someone run in the rain while you're sitting inside and thinking, boy, I'm sure glad that's not me. Those are just the beginnings of small, small things that can turn into much larger problems. So when we see someone suffering, just a second, when we see someone suffering, when we see someone who is just experiencing maybe an inconvenience, they dropped a book, they tripped over something, instead of having this inward quick little, that's kind of funny, in any of those instances, let us always, let our first thoughts be to help those who are going through even the smallest inconveniences. Yeah.
Stepfather would say to us when one of my other brothers was being punished, if we started to gloat, it was, you could be next.
Yep. Yeah, going back to the parent analogy, oftentimes you ended up giving yourself a punishment for gloating over someone else's punishment. Because the parent would turn right around and say, oh, you think that's funny? You go to your room too. Yeah, Baxter.
And I'm glad you've emphasized in all this. This is not some random bad thing that happened to the Israelites. This was God destroying Jerusalem for a reason. But even though that was the case, it was wrong for them to jump on top
Right.
and gloat. And that's a good reminder for us. If somebody lives a sinful lifestyle and suffers because of that, it's not our place to say, that just, God took care of that, and gloat. And that's not our place.
And in the same way, yeah, if we see someone living a sinful lifestyle, living a destructive lifestyle, our job is not to rub it, is not to say, you're going to hell, to say, oh, you're sure caught up in this thing that you can't turn around from. Our reaction should be, offer them something better. Reach out a hand and say, this is not the way things are supposed to be going, but let me offer you an alternative. And yeah, that's a very good point that Baxter brought up. Israel's punishment was absolutely justified, just as all of the Lord's punishment is always justified. Even if people are receiving punishment because it's something they brought about themselves. Our job is not to stand off to the side and say, boy, they got what they deserved. We should feel sympathetic. Our hearts should yearn for criminals. Our hearts should yearn for people who are locked up because of things that they've done. Because we should feel that there's an opportunity to show them the best way, to give them the good news. We are blessed to live in a time after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ because we can show them the physical written down word that because Jesus was crucified, they can turn around from their sin. They can stop what they're doing, start reading the Bible, start studying, and start a life that can lead to eternal salvation. Yeah.
Just another observation, if I've understood the timeline on this right, none of the Edomites who are getting this message, none of them were directly hurt by anybody from Jerusalem.
No.
If this was like 600 or so BC,
Around there, yeah.
I mean, we're like, this is 1,000 years ago.
Yep.
Right? Like Jacob and Esau. Can't that happen today? Where there's this is like Hatfield and McCoy kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
you don't even remember what the original disagreement was about, but that can happen to us. Between people groups, where there's a misunderstanding that goes way back and assumptions are made, and and we end up thinking a certain way, and it's hard to change that thinking. And it's difficult but necessary to try to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and do some reading and get educated and talk to people.
Yeah. Our society today very much has lines drawn between political parties, between ethnicity groups, between whether you believe Captain America or Iron Man was the correct one in that conflict for you superhero fans. And sometimes it's inconsequential things like movie superheroes, and sometimes it's as hard and difficult a thing as skin color. And yet, the only reason things are like that is because someone in the past had an evil thought and carried out their biased, awful beliefs. And that feeds into bad feelings that span, with biblical example, thousands of years. Yep.
The comment about the acid eating the container made me think of Galatians 5, 14 and 15, where Paul said, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, take care that you are not consumed by one another." And that was written to fellow Christians.
Yep. Within the church itself. So I think if we can sum up this entire thing into, so what's the lesson, what's the main thing we can take from this is forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't easy. Forgiveness isn't always two-way. Sometimes forgiveness has to come from one particular party to open up forgiveness to be both ways. But whether it's someone who's wronged you, or whether it's a long family history of we don't like those people because of this thing that happened way back when, that can all stop with forgiveness.
You don't even remember what happened way back when.
Exactly. If the reason you dislike someone else is because they happen to be a part of that, the Hatfields and the McCoys are a perfect example. What even happened? It was something over a cow. It was something over someone's horse that they had a disagreement. And yet, their kids were told, we don't like them. So then they told their kids, we don't like them. They told their kids, we don't like them. And on down the road, why are we fighting? Who knows? Romeo and Juliet. We don't know why those families dislike each other. Shakespeare never feels that pertinent information of why do these families not get along? I don't know. But they don't. And it ends with the death of 2 children. Simply because of 2 families who can't get along. Yes, please.
I was just thinking, I'm not gonna name any specifics, but grudges for non-Christians should be much harder to overcome.
Right.
We know, and I'm not a grudge holder, but I did have a grudge against one of my former owners of our company. Maybe I've been with the new company for 5 years because he was an evil person. But I was able to, it took time, it took me about a year, because he basically shafted me out of about $3,000 and all sorts of other things. And, but I overcame it because I knew that it would consume me and it was wrong, even though I never confronted him about it, anything like that, because it wouldn't have done any good. However, I've had family members who are non-Christians who have died with those grudges. And it's hurt the family because of it, because they never associated with those people again. And that's the hard thing for people who are non-Christians. They don't even know that a grudge is wrong, number one. They don't realize how bad it is to hold the grudge. And it only hurts them and their family. It doesn't hurt the person usually that you're holding the grudge against. It hurts you and your family and that person's family, because the families quit interacting,
Yep.
which is unfortunate.
And that cuts them off from any chance that they might have of, they might think, oh, that family that goes to this church, well, I don't wanna have anything to do with that church because they're there.
Right?
They are there.
Yeah. So, yeah, we're fortunate that we have the Bible to tell us that this is wrong, we have to get past it, pray about it, and we will get past it.
Yeah. Yeah, I see.
Like, somebody doesn't have to be right for me to be nice to them.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
isn't that what God is doing in the book of Obadiah? He's a
offering
terrible-
one last chance to a people who have done horrible things.
Yes, so he's reaching out, and he's not softening the blow, like, he's not saying this isn't a big deal. It is a big deal, and you will be lost unless you do this, this, and this.
Because it's such a big deal, that's why he's sending a messenger to them,
Right.
you know?
I think it's interesting, and possibly because of their background with being children of Jacob, actually, that he has a special message to them, because all these other nations were warned in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, as well as the Edomites.
Yep,
But they have a special warning,
yep,
and I think it's because God really cared for them.
yep. Yep,
You know, we need to pray for those people. God can handle what we can't handle.
That's true.
yeah. Ultimately, God is the Father. God is the one who carries punishment. It's our job to help people realize why they were punished, but also going forward to realize I don't have to receive that punishment again. Yeah,
I'm just remembering, I don't remember what church we were going to in Illinois. Anyway, the preacher said, it was a sermon about forgiveness. And he said that, you know, I want you to take your checkbook and write on there that you forgive this person. And, you know, and there was a person that had really, really wronged me, and I was able to forgive them after that. I just really concentrated on it. I mean, he said it better than I did, but, you know, even if they were actually really hurting your family, you gotta let go because it will consume you.
and yeah, I like that idea of physically putting your anger, putting your grudge onto a piece of paper. And in that moment, I would look at that and go, this is meaningless. This is worth nothing. There is no reason for me to hold on to this. And throw it away.
Grudges are a waste of your effort.
Yep. And one last example of something from my own personal experience, and then we'll start to wrap up because we're getting around that time. But I have witnessed members of a church that I previously attended stop going to any church because of a issue of money with another member of the church. And the whole time, I was not directly involved with either of these families, but it was over maybe some kind of thing at work, involved kind of thing. And the only thing I could think about is no one had said anything hurtful to the other person, no one had physically assaulted the other person, but because one person believed that they were owed money that was not given to them, they left the church. And my thoughts just went to, this was over money. The love of money, what does the Bible say about the love of money? Root of all evil. And so again, it's hard being the one slighted, but we have the blessing, especially amongst members of the church, to be able to realize if it's something as inconsequential as money, then at least there's the blessing in that. It wasn't over literally murdering another member of your family. It wasn't over someone coming into your home after it's caught on fire and stealing the few things you have left. Let us remember that forgiveness will set you free. It sounds so cliche, it sounds so, it's a thing that we've heard over and over, but forgiveness will set you free. Just as the Lord forgave us, forgave every one of their sins that one day that Jesus died. His blood forgave all of our sins, past, present, and future, as long as we turn to Him. Thank you for a wonderful class.